Our final video today is about pivot tables, which are a really useful tool for summarizing and aggregating data in a data table. And our data set lends itself very, very well to pivot tables. So I'm going to walk through an example where we summarize the life expectancy by continent. And I'm going to use the 2007 data. So first thing I'm going to do is make a subset. I'm going to call it DF07. Not the best name. Names are hard to think of. But I'm going to subset the GM07 data set in the following way. So I had to look up the syntax for this. But I'm just making a new data frame from the two columns, continent and life expectancy. I'm taking a look at the dimensions now that I've created the new data frame. So I'm printing the original dimensions and then the dimensions after creating the new data frame, and just notice that the number of columns has decreased to 2 as expected. To create a pivot table, I'm going to use PD to reference Pandas, because this is a method within the Pandas library. And I'm going to call the pivot table function. I'm going to reference my data as the first argument. And then the values that I want to summarize go next. And then the columns come after that. So by default, the pivot table function takes the mean of whatever values are specified and categorizes them according to whatever's specified in the columns. So if I do this, I should get a nice table that shows me the mean life expectancy by column, by continent. So you can see what a useful tool this is. This exercise will ask you to do something similar, but for GDP by country. We can also create a pivot table with 3 variables. So here's how I would do that. I'm specifying a variable df1, and I'm selecting now from my original data frame. I'm taking continent, year, and life expectancy as variables. So those are my 3 columns. The pivot table is going to reference these 3 columns. So PD for Pandas library, pivot table function, reference the data, the values that I want to summarize. So I do want to take the average life expectancy. And then I'm going to index by year, and I want the columns to be by continent. So let's run this and then look back at how the code generated this. Okay, so I'm specifying the index as the year, so notice that that became each row. So within each year, I have the mean life expectancy categorized by continent. Finally, there's one more thing we can show today. There are actually a lot of things you can do with pivot tables, but suppose I want to do something other than find the mean, which is a default. I can do a median, I can do the minimum, which is what I'm doing in this example. So I'm using the same method, same data table as I used above here, the df1. And the only thing different now is I'm adding an argument called the aggregate function. So let's run this and see what that looks like. Okay, so now instead of the mean for each year and continent, I now have the minimum life expectancy, which if we look at Africa and America's, actually all of them in 1952, it really is pretty stunning. So not to be overlooked. That's our last video. In this lesson, there is a somewhat open-ended problem with stocks that you can do, and my hope is that you would take some time to apply some of the methods that we've used in this lesson with the Gapminder data to some new data set. And I'm suggesting you use the Investors Exchange because I found that one to be really stable.